Welcome to Stuck in a Truck. We are at episode 58 of Stuck in a Truck, and this is a really exciting day for me because of the fact that we have a special guest tuning in all the way from Israel. So his name is Daniel. I'm going to do it. Gaffin. Am I right?
You're there, Gaffin.
Okay. So this is really exciting for me because of the fact that now we have the ability to get guests on the show. We are being able to deal with the COVID shutdowns and hear about different impacts that it has across the world, not just here locally in Maryland or in the United States, but now we have a special guest today that's going to be telling us a little bit about what he learned and things that you can do to become successful during these shutdowns, how to take advantage of it, and what are some of the things that he has gone through and learned about. I've had the past couple of minutes to talk to him a little bit and just hear a few things and to see the similarities and success points that we can all share together. So what I want to do is I want to hand it over to Daniel. This is a great opportunity, ladies and gentlemen. So if I can tell you right now how awesome this is to know that Stuck in a Truck has made it all the way from Baltimore 695 58 weeks ago, stuck in traffic, now is live in Israel. So this is pretty cool that we're stuck in a truck in Israel right now. So this is pretty cool. He's been amazed that I'm actually in my truck. So that's why he's giggling. But I want to hand it over to Daniel. And Daniel has a few tips that he's learned over COVID. So if you guys are young entrepreneurs, business people looking to get to that next level, take some notes. Daniel's got some really good tips to listen to, and it won't cost you a thing. Am I right?
Yeah. Although I kind of feel a little bit like I'm misleading everybody. I'm not in a truck. I'm sitting in my house with 5 kids. I want to be in a truck right now. I would love to get in that truck with you and go for a drive because it looks beautiful out there. Were you in the forest or something?
Actually, we're outside of the Blue Line Canine Training Center in Joppa, sitting in a parking lot. It's a very beautiful area.
That's gorgeous. So I've got 5 kids, all under the age of 12 at home, and I need to get into a truck and drive. So that's great. I'm loving this. Cool. Well, thank you so much for having me on the show. I really appreciate you inviting me on. What's really cool and exciting about this is that we met on Podbooker, which is the platform that I launched. So I'm essentially doing this podcast talking about how I launched and grew my podcast, and we got connected through Podbooker, which is amazing. So that's cool. I guess I'll tell you the story of how I got into podcasting. So about 4 years ago, I'm playing tennis, and I'm very competitive with tennis. What do you play?
Nothing. I play Lego is what I play. I
play Lego.
Yeah.
Right. So I love playing tennis. Anyway, so I get this phone call. This is like what I call the phone call that changed my life. They say the phone call. It sounds cheesy, but for me, it really did change my life. This guy calls me up and says to me, Daniel, I heard you had an interesting business story, and I'd love to have you on my podcast. And I'll never forget what I said to him. I said, what the heck is a podcast? Like, I had no idea what a podcast was. And in fact, 4 years ago, most people didn't know what a podcast was. Now, today, there's about 150 million Americans listening to podcasts. It's gone crazy. And there's over 1.5 million podcasts that are out there. So I said, sure, I'd love to be on your podcast. It sounds great. So I get on his show, and I just started talking, sharing my story. And then at the end, I said, wow, that was so much fun. But I had this question. I said, how many people were listening to that? Right? Like, I'm just talking to a wall. I'm in my bedroom in my pajamas, and I said to him, I said, how many people are listening? And in my head, I thought to myself, he's going to say 20, 30 people, right? Because at that point, I'd never done any speaking engagements. I'd never spoken in public. I was the class clown in high school, so I would get up on tables and, put on a show for everyone and get attention for that. But that was it, right? And so when he said to me there were over 1,000 people listening, I fell off my chair. I'm like, what? Are you kidding me? 1,000 people? Like, some of the biggest speakers, they get on stage, and if they've got 1,000 people in the audience, that's a packed crowd, right?
Right.
So I'm like, where are all these people? And he said, well, they're all over the world. And he starts listing all these countries And I'm like, this is nuts. I need to get on podcasts, right? So within 2 weeks, I started my own podcast show called Can I Pick Your Brain? And I decided I'm going to pick the brains of some of the most successful entrepreneurs and business leaders of this generation. There were only two problems with that. Number one, I didn't know any business leaders. I didn't know any successful, entrepreneurs to interview. And number two is, how do I get people to listen to the podcast, right? How do you get people to listen, right? So that's when I had this aha moment where I said, well, hold on a second. That guy had over 1,000 people listening, right? And I'm a nobody. Why don't I get on other podcasts and leverage their audiences, right? They've already built an audience. Why do I need to do the hard work and try to figure this all out myself? I'll just go as a guest on other podcasts, and then I'll just talk about my show, and hopefully people will come and listen to my podcast. Well, that's what I did. And within a very short period of time, literally less than 2 years, I grew my podcast to over 250,000 downloads and interviewed 4 billionaires, the smartest man alive, the leading hostage negotiator for the FBI, the US memory champion, and a whole host of other incredible guests. So that was like insane. I thought, this is mad. That's the first part of the story. The second part of the story is I started getting bombarded with pitches from PR agencies and book publicists and people trying to be a guest on my show. They would just send me emails. I'd get dozens of these emails a day. I don't know if you get this as well, but like people literally just will reach out randomly and say, hey, I want to be on your show. And there were two problems. Number one is I didn't know who they were, right? And they didn't know who I was, clearly from their messaging, because they were lazy. They didn't do any research at all.
Right.
There's no relationship, number one. And number two is they just sucked. They didn't know how to present themselves. Like, they just sounded boring. They sounded like everybody else. Like, oh, I wrote a book and I'm a consultant. Yeah, thank you very much. Like, I've seen hundreds of those, no. And I would send them all to spam. And after a couple of months, my spam folder started getting really big. And I thought to myself, I can't believe this. There's nobody doing a good job about this. And that's when I had this light bulb moment where I said, hold on a second. I've got my own top-rated podcast. I've been a guest now on over 60 podcasts. I'm friends with all these top-rated hosts, and I've interviewed over 150 high-profile guests on my show. So I know what a great guest sounds like and what a host is looking for in a guest, and I've got the relationships. So why don't I start a podcast booking agency? And that's what I did. So that was 3.5 years ago, and since then I've been getting, authors and people on top-ranked podcasts in their space. And then about a year ago, I realized that I'm only serving a very small market because I'm charging thousands of dollars as an agency to get people on the top shows. But there are, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people out there that want to get on podcasts, but they can't afford to hire an agency, right? And on the flip side, there's over 1.5 million podcasts that are out there, and only probably the top 10% are getting guests from agencies. And the rest of them, so 90% of podcast hosts, are struggling to find good guests. Like, how do they get good guests for their show? That's when I had the idea for Podbooker.com, which is essentially, so Podbooker is a marketplace. It's a platform where guests can set up a profile, and then they can reach out. They could find hosts, they could find podcasts, and then pitch the hosts on the platform. And then hosts can find guests, and they can book them on their show from the platform. In fact, that's how I got onto this show, right? I reached out to you on Podbooker, and
Yep.
You said, let's do it. And now here we are. So that's the backstory.
Put the link in the comment section. So anybody watching can go ahead and click podbooker.com, and you can go on there and set up your profile and see if you can be a guest on one of the different podcasts, right? Because that's where I know he's about to lead into this one. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I had to let everybody know. They could get to podbooker.com real quick and easy from the show. So go ahead.
Yeah. So, I mean, the thing is that, wait, what we now
they could go to podbooker.com. They can set up their profile. They can do get on different shows, or if they're starting a show, they can find guests.
Right. And now we're also launching some really cool features as well. Like, for example, I've been on 60 podcasts, but I don't remember which ones I've been on. Right. And some of you guys listening to this, you may have been on podcasts, but you don't remember which ones. Well, on the profile, you can actually you can build a portfolio of podcasts that you've been featured on. So that way you can get booked on bigger shows, because when hosts look at your profile, they can see which podcasts you've already been on. Now, the other cool thing that we're launching is a review feature where you can actually get reviews from hosts, which hopefully I'm going to get a nice review right over here. And then what happens is when a host looks at your podcast profile, I mean your guest profile, they'll see all the reviews from hosts that have had you on their show. Because here's the thing, you know, you can write an email, you could send a message to a podcast host and say how amazing you are, right? Like, I'm amazing, you know, I've got all these achievements. But, you know, obviously you're going to say that about yourself. But when other people speak about you, that gives me a lot more confidence in who you are and the value is that you bring. Because you have other hosts, when other hosts are talking about you and giving you recommendations, you're way more likely to get accepted on the bigger podcasts. And that's the goal. The goal is to get onto the bigger shows, right? I have so many people saying to me, Daniel, can you get me on Joe Rogan? I'm like, yeah, sure. First, you just need to become Jim Carrey, and then I'll get you on his show. That's easy. You know what I'm saying? So you got to set your expectations, but
start a little lower, right? Start with baseline, get to that point and work your way up. So yeah. I have to say, from my experience, so I did join Podbooker about 3 weeks ago. And what's funny is that I have 2 podcasts, and I have them both registered on Podbooker. One is Dog Talk, and then we have Stuck in the Truck, which is what we're on right now. And for me, I was bombarded. I was bombarded by different people that wanted to just be on the show, and it was really difficult I found it difficult to even filter to go through, because you couldn't really tell if it was legit. Half the emails that I was receiving appeared to be fake, if that makes sense. Like they just so like almost like systematic or robotic that it just didn't even seem like I wanted to put that person on the show or be connected, right? Yeah. So I guess one of the other big things would be is with Podbooker that I found was that if you're a young entrepreneur and you're just trying to get your product out there, and you don't have a podcast, but this might be a really good avenue, right? To really get your product seen by different people into different genres. And I guess my question to you is, since you've been doing this for so long, if you're a young entrepreneur selling like Scentsy or something along those lines, do you feel that they would benefit from being on podcast? And what kind of podcast should a young entrepreneur looking to get their business out there, what do you think they should be looking for? In a sense of what kind of shows to go on?
Yeah, great question. So here's the thing. Pretty much the goal for any entrepreneur is to build an audience. That's number one, right? Because when you build a loyal audience, you don't need to run after people. You don't need to sell. You don't need to waste money throwing it on marketing campaigns. You've got an audience that trusts you and likes you, and they're going to buy from you, right? But the question is how do you build an audience in 2020, right? Or 2021, if you're listening to this in a couple of months from now, right? Yeah. So how do you do that, right? Especially on social media, where it's really difficult because people say, oh, I'm going to build an Instagram, following. Well, here's the thing about Instagram. It's noisy, like really noisy. Everybody's on there and everyone's posting crap, basically, mostly, right? And if you think about it, when you post on Instagram or on Facebook, who's looking at that? Who's looking at your post? Well, it's most likely someone who's sitting on the toilet till their thighs go numb and they're just scrolling through the feed, and you've got about, maybe 3 seconds of their attention, if that. 3 seconds of attention is nothing. You can't sell anything in 3 seconds. So the key is attention. That's the most important. That's the holy grail. If you want to be successful as an entrepreneur, there's one thing that you want to be going after, and that's getting as much attention as you can. Not about reach. Everyone talks about reach, but it's not reach. It's attention. You can get 100,000. You can get 100,000 views on a post. I had on LinkedIn, I had 300,000 views on one post. It went viral. Okay, but here's the thing. I got zero business from that because the views don't really mean anything. It's about how much attention you get. How long can you hold someone's attention for? Today, the average attention span is around 8 seconds, which is 1 second less than a goldfish. That's how bad it is, right? And it's even worse on social media. But here's an astounding fact for you guys. If you're thinking about where do I get the attention, podcasts is the way to go. 85% of people that listen to podcasts listen to the whole episode from beginning to end. And the average episode is 45 minutes long. That means you've got 45 minutes of someone's attention. If you can't sell what you're doing in 45 minutes, you need to go and do something else, right? Your problem isn't getting, people to buy. Your problem is you don't know how to sell what you're selling. That's a different problem. So
that is a very bad problem.
It's a very bad problem. But that's how you get the attention today. And what's also really interesting is that people who listen to podcasts are actually more likely to buy. The reason why that is because of two things. Number one is because the personality type. People who listen to podcasts are people who invest in themselves. They're always looking to grow. They're always looking to improve. Whereas, people who are on social, they're just sitting there kind of just passing time. They're in sort of passive mode, right? On people listening to podcasts, they're in active mode. Their mind is in this proactive mode. They're either going for a run, they're driving, doing the dishes, whatever it is, but they're really listening to the podcast because they want to invest in themselves. Those are the people that are going to buy your book. Those are the people that are going to buy your product. Those are the people that are going to follow you and buy into what you're doing.
I like it. So now if you were, young entrepreneurs, let's just say they don't have a podcast, being a guest is just as valuable, or do you feel that they should really try to come up with the episodes and build a following through a podcast themselves?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I get that question a lot. People say, Daniel, should I start my own podcast or should I be a guest on other podcasts? The short answer is you want to do both, right? And I'll give you but if you had a choice between which one to do, I would do getting on podcasts more important than launching a show. And the reason why I say that is because especially if you don't have a following right now, it's really hard to build a following. So if you launch a podcast today, it's going to take you, realistically, it's going to take you 1 year to 2 years to really build a decent sized audience. So you've got to really invest that time, and that's a commitment. And you're not going to make any money from the podcast for the first year or 2 years until you've built that following. Whereas you go on other people's podcasts and they're bringing the audience to you. They've done all the work, right? They've edited the podcast, they've produced the podcast, they've marketed the podcast, they've built the audience, they've looked for the guests, they've prepared, they've done everything, they've done all the work. You just show up and you're just like, hey, I'm in front of an audience that this person spent, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years building. So you want to do both, but if you had a choice between the two, I would do getting on podcasts as a guest. If you are going to launch your own podcast, be strategic about it. Don't launch one that just sounds like everyone else's, right? Everyone's launching a podcast now. People say to me, Daniel, I don't know if it's worth launching a podcast because there's already, 1.5 million podcasts out there. I wouldn't worry about that because we're still early. If you think about it, there's about close to 100 million YouTube channels, 100 million. Okay. There's over 1 billion blogs. So 1 million or 1.5 million podcasts is a drop in the ocean. You're still early. Now is the time to start a podcast. No question about it. But you want to differentiate yourself. You want to know who your ideal audience is. Who are you targeting? Get very, very niche. And then don't come up with a fancy name. A lot of people, they get very cute and very, with the name. I love the name Stuck in a Truck. It says what it does. You're stuck in a truck. That's it, right? So I'm actually launching a new podcast this week, believe it or not. And it's going to be called Grow Your Show. And guess what it's about, right? How to grow your how to grow your show, right? I made it very simple. It's Grow Your Show. It's very catchy and memorable, and it says what it does. So the purpose of me launching this new podcast, by the way, is and you'll find it on iTunes and Spotify, all these places, in about a week from now. Which, when I say a week from now, I don't know when this is going to actually go live. I think we're live now.
We're live right now on Facebook.
Okay.
And this evening it will be launched on YouTube. So if anybody's missing it, to go back, they can go back to blk9tv.com. Will be launched on YouTube just as you're watching live. But iTunes, Spotify, I got there's 10 platforms I'm on.
Google Podcasts, all the lovely ones, all the good ones.
Yeah, it's gonna go live at midnight tonight, so it'll essentially be so on all the iTunes or all the podcast platforms, it'll go at midnight tonight.
Yeah. So if you're listening to this on any of those platforms, you'll probably find my podcast in about a week from now on there. So you just have to go to Grow Your Show, and you'll find it. But that podcast, the reason why I'm launching it is because I've had so many people say to me, Daniel, how do I grow my podcast? I've started a podcast. I just don't know how to get traction. How do I get people to listen? And so I decided I'm gonna interview successful podcast hosts. So people who have had over 100,000 downloads on their podcast, I'm going to be interviewing them to find out how did they get their first 100,000. How did they grow their show? And that's going to be the purpose of the podcast.
Now, a couple of questions that I think come up to me very often with podcasting is like, how do I get into it? Where's the best place to start? Now, for me, I used a site called Spreaker to essentially host my show. Is there any other hosting site that you think is better, worse, easier to connect with? Or do you find that Spreaker is a good way? Because again, I think a lot of people get confused about having the shows on iTunes, Google Podcasts, and I guess they don't realize that that's not the host. That's essentially the media launch, right? That's just find them.
Yes, you just need to find one host, and that host will then send your podcast to all the platforms for you. You don't have to do anything, right? You don't have to upload every episode onto all the different platforms. So, what's for me personally, I'll say that Buzzsprout is the one that I would recommend people to go to, just because I feel like it's so easy to set up. It's really simple. They've made it very, very, very easy for anyone to figure out how to set it up. I'm going to be using Buzzsprout for my show. And actually, do you know what? Here's what I'm going to do. I love doing things like this. I'm going to start a Facebook group today. Okay, I'm going to start a Facebook group today, and and anyone that wants to come to this group, I'm going to document how I launch my podcast free. So I'm just trying to figure out how do I get them to check out the Facebook. I'm literally going to set it up after we get off here. So what's the best way for your listeners to find out how to get access to the Facebook group?
So we're actually live right now on the official MJ Solar Facebook page. So what I'll do is I'll put it in the comment section for you to see it, but it's
So I guess anyone that wants to join the Facebook group to see how I launch my podcast in less than a week,
if what you want to do is maybe if you send me the link on the group.
Yeah, I'll send you the link. Yeah.
And then we'll put it. I'll put it right on next week's show and make sure everybody has full access to it. So it goes across the board. I'll put it in the description in the YouTube and everything like that, so they can have the full access.
Sweet. Yeah. So I mean, if you want like someone to show you the step-by-step, like how to launch the podcast, I'm happy to do that. I'm doing it anyway, so I figure I'll just document it. It's kind of like what Gary Vee always says. I can't watch too much Gary Vee because I end up getting anxiety. But he's good sometimes. You gotta hustle your face off.
Yeah.
I'm not hustling my face off.
I'm more that guy. I like
I know
the Billy Mays of the. I love Billy Mays type personalities. That's
He's good, but I kind of feel like I just don't want him to drop dead of a heart attack. I feel like any minute he's just like ready to have like a seizure, and it gets me anxious, man. Like also, I think once you have kids, I have 5 kids I just don't have the energy for that. But But he always says, and I think this is great advice, is he says you should document what you're doing, because when you document what you're doing, then you're creating value for other people, like what you're doing. Like you are doing exactly that. You are sitting in your truck and you're in traffic and you're like, wait, why don't I just document this conversation I'm having with myself about my anger management issues because I almost killed the guy in front of me. And so
started. Yep.
Yeah. So you really hit the nail on the head. You did it naturally, where you're just like, hey, let me document this. And now look, here we are.
Yep.
Like, I wouldn't be here if you didn't document. So thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah,
and and all the people watching this and getting inspired by your show, they wouldn't be able to get the inspiration and motivation if you didn't do this. So it's a huge thank you to you. And everyone just should take that advice and start documenting whatever you're doing. Don't be afraid. There's always somebody who knows less than you. That's the one thing I think, if you want to take away anything from this, listening to this particular episode, it would be, there's always someone who knows less than you. It's very easy for us to say, oh, what do I know? What do I know? Like, oh, I'm not a Gary Vaynerchuk. I'm not a Tim Ferriss. I'm not a whoever it is, Grant Cardone, or I'm not a Kim Kardashian. But you are a few rungs up from someone who was where you were, maybe a year or two ago. Maybe it's someone who's just younger than you, that doesn't have the experience. Maybe it's just someone that hasn't read the books that you've read, that hasn't watched some of the videos. Like, you've got knowledge that people need.
Yeah.
I don't care who you are. You have something to offer this world, right? Everyone has something to offer this world.
The big thing that I would like to go around saying is that an expert in anything was once a beginner. So just don't put the ego in your way. The other thing we actually talked about a few episodes ago, which is right along the lines of what you're talking about, is documenting what we're doing. Is one of the things that I always tell people is, like, you said you had 5 children. I have 2 myself. And one of the things that what I love about doing the Stuck in the Truck episodes and doing these recordings and the videos and everything that I do is that my children, unlike any other generation before us, but my children, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, they're going to have a living audio and visual of their father and my messages of inspiration and everything I'm trying to do for the rest of eternally, right? Until it's gone, it's gone. But they will be able to show my grandkids when I pass away my messages, my fortitude, my work ethic, my thoughts, my inspirations. And sometimes, you hear about your grandfather, your grandmothers, you hear about history, but you don't know. It's crazy to think about it, but where these podcasts, these FaceTime videos, this is documenting history unlike any time before. And we can learn from it every day,
Yeah, you're so right, because 2 things. Number one is, when I wrote my book, The Self-Help Addict, I wanted to write that book for 10 years, but I kept procrastinating. I kept saying, I don't know, who needs to read this? Like, what do I know? I'm not good enough, right? But then I realized, I'm going to write this for my oldest son. I'm going to write this for my oldest child. And so on his 9th birthday, I came to him and I said, for your 10th birthday, I'm going to give you a special gift. And he got really excited. He said, what is it? I said, I'm going to give you a book. And he's like, I don't want a book. Dad, I don't need a book. I want a PlayStation. I don't need a book. So I said, no. I said, I'm going to write the book. I'm going to write the book, and I'm writing it for you. And he gave me such a huge hug. He was like, oh, I'm so excited for the book. And you know what? That made me accountable, because now I'm like, oh, crap, I got to write this book now. I just promised my son I'm giving him a book on his 10th birthday. So January 16th, on his 10th birthday, this is 2 years ago, I handed him the first copy of The Self-Help Addict. And I wrote that for him. And you know what? You talk about your grandfather. I wish my grandfather wrote a book. You have no idea. You have no idea how I wish there was videos of him. I wish there was podcasts of him. I wish there was books about him, because he's my biggest inspiration. He's unfortunately, he's not with us anymore. And he was in 18 concentration camps. He was shot and buried alive at one point. He pretended to be dead, and he was hung twice on 2 separate occasions. They hunted him down and they tried to hang him. And on both times the sirens went off. They had false alarms, and he managed to escape. He was about 10 feet from the gas chambers, but a horse made on one of the Nazi soldiers' boots. And the Nazi turned around to my grandfather and said, "Hey, dirty Jew, come out here and clean this." My grandfather walked out of the line, cleaned his boot, and he told him to go. He told him to, skedaddle. And my grandfather spent 5 years in the camps, and he was only 13 when he started out there. He left when he was 18. He was liberated, and he had nothing. Like, he didn't have family. His whole family was murdered in front of him. He had no contacts. He didn't even know how to speak the language. He was in a foreign country. He didn't have a penny to his name, nothing. And he built himself up from scratch, rebuilt his family, he became a multi-millionaire by trading stocks and currency. He built himself a hotel because he wanted to serve people. Every time we visited him, he was in the kitchen chopping meat or vegetables, whatever. He just wanted to serve people his whole life. He lived in a tiny apartment, even though he was a multi-millionaire. He never drove a car. He just lived very simply. He gave away 80%, 90% of his money to charity. That's the life that he lived. But you know what? He was a quiet man. He never wrote a book. He never spoke about anything publicly. And in a way, I feel like there's a lot of humility there. And obviously, there was a lot of pain. But do you know how much I would pay to have my grandfather's book?
I'm very interested. Matter of fact, there is something that you'd mentioned talking about with the things with your grandfather, the things that he lived through. I mean, it's unimaginable. It really is. But something that I've always said is that, when bad things happen, we tend to become overwhelmed. Mm-hmm. In the story that you just said, I don't know if anybody else caught this, but you said that he was online to go into the gas chamber. Pretty much that's a 100% death sentence. You were done. Yep. A horse took a dookie on a guy's boot.
Yes.
He had to clean shit off of a foot, but it saved his life.
Yes.
If you think about some of the craziest things we've been through in life, and believe me when I tell you, there's nothing compared to that story. But how many people do you think focus so much on the fact that they had to clean the shit off of a shoe instead of realizing that one moment saved has a huge impact? In this case, cleaning poop off of a foot saved his life and allowed him the opportunity to rebuild an entire family and generation and everything else that he's accomplished since then. So when you think about, and again, like I said, it's not a comparison of what he went through, but it's how often do we ever really look at sometimes when things go bad in our lives that maybe it's to prepare us for the good that's coming.
Wow.
A horse taking a dump on a guy's shoe allowed your grandfather an opportunity to build an entire generation of family that never would have happened.
I've shared that story many times, and it's the first time that someone took that message. I mean, what a beautiful message. Wow. Really, it's incredible. I never even thought about it. It's so true. It's so true. People are, today we're not even cleaning shit. We're just having low Wi-Fi and we get pissed off. We get stuck in the truck. And some bastard in front of us, some old lady is just driving too slow, and we get mad. We get angry. What the hell? So you're right. My grandfather had a smile on his face. As far as I can remember, I never saw that smile leave his face. He always had a smile on his face when he met people. And today, if someone's happy, people say, "Why are you so happy? Why are you so happy?" Like, I have to have a reason. It's it's crazy. You know what I'm saying? Like, the default setting today is miserable. We're suffering. We're upset. We're angry. We're in pain. We live in such a beautiful world. There are people out there that unfortunately their egos get the better of them, and so they can make it difficult to live in a world with them. That's for sure. including my own ego.
Yeah.
Probably more than anyone else's ego, my own ego gets in my way and stops me from having the best life I could have. I look at my 2-year-old and I watch him play. Oh my God, man. Wow, if I could play like that. Gee. But that's because
I promise you can. But listen, Daniel, give me 1 second. I do have to close out the show.
All right.
Everybody,
that.
Yeah, thank you everybody for tuning in, paying attention to Stuck in the Truck. It really means a lot to us that you're able to tune in every week, watch our show, listen to our show. And I hope today that you guys really seen the opportunity out there to get yourselves to that next level. If you want more information, go to podbooker.com, get yourself registered as a guest, get yourself on shows, start your own show. Feel free to reach out to us. You can watch this episode anytime you want at blk9tv.com. Daniel, thank you for coming on our show today. I hope to have you as a guest again. I also want to ask you, what is your grandfather's name?
His name was Moshe Chaim Geffen, and my youngest son is named after him.
There's no way I'm going to say that. So I'm going to ask for you to say it one more time for me. The fact that I can't say that. So if you can say that for me one more time.
Moshe Chaim Geffen.
And I want to say to everybody, the reason why I asked them to say it again is because of this. We only let things die when we let them die. So in this case, I want to say thank you, Daniel, for sharing the story, but more importantly, keeping your grandfather alive today by saying his name twice on our show. He is a true inspiration, and I'm never going to forget that story. And remember, everybody, if there's a little bit of shit on your shoe, don't let it overwhelm you. Clean it off and thank the stars for the next day that you have, because you have the next opportunity to become successful. Thank you guys for paying attention to Stuck in a Truck. See you guys all next week.